Hello, everybody. It's John Scanlon with the Irish Hypnotherapy Conference podcast. And today we are talking to Adam Cox of the Hypnotist Podcast. And also, Adam will be speaking in Dublin in April at the 2024 conference. So, Adam, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great, John. Lovely to be here today.
It's fantastic. It's a fantastic Friday, so we'll enjoy the freedom of the weekend that's about to come. You have a very interesting career. How did you get into hypnotherapy in the first place, or was this something that came after? You had a PR business, I think, did you?
I still have the PR business. So for me, it was a strange journey in the sense that I think I saw a stage hypnosis show when I was about 10 years old.
Right.
And I was a very shy, introverted child. And I think I remember getting, I think it was one of the Ormond McGill kind of like books, like really, and I think I read something by Gil Boyne, like when I was about 11 or 12. And I just had this kind of interest in kind of hypnosis because I kind of hoped it would kind of like be some kind of solution to be me being a bit more confident. The real catalyst was that at the age of 18, I was doing a psychology degree, and a few things kind of happened in a short time frame that led me to be very, very socially anxious, to the extent that I became a recluse for about a year. And I would only leave my tiny apartment to get essential groceries at the 24-hour supermarket. But I would also go to the 24-hour library in the university because there was no people around. I would go at night and I had this kind of intention of, I wanted to fix myself. So I had this social anxiety and I didn't want to have it. And I didn't want to go down the medical route because I knew they would prescribe me with antidepressants and kind of SSRIs or beta blockers. I didn't want that because I knew that somehow I was creating it. And that led for me to investigate all the different kind of change protocols, everything from psychoanalysis, counseling, and you learn very quickly that there are certain things on the other end of the spectrum that are designed to create change more quickly. So then I discovered things like hypnosis, NLP, and some of the CBT approaches, which seem to create change quicker. So I was my own first client in many ways. I was kind of guinea pig on myself, managed to get over that social anxiety, and then my frame of reference was, if I could get over this crippling fear, I can get over pretty much anything else. So I finished my psychology degree, started working because I had a passion for psychology, started working in sales in a radio station because I wanted to learn the psychology of influence. Then worked for a PR agency because multiplied influence in the psychology of perception management is the PR industry, if that makes sense. And at the age of 23, felt like I'd learned enough from these two companies that I worked for, became self-employed, set up my own agency. And then I've had a passion for kind of investing and that kind of stuff. So the money that my PR agency made, I kind of put into stock market investment, properties, all that kind of stuff. And that gave me financial freedom. So one of the things that I'm known for is a course called Hypnotic Wealth, because for me, I have this passion for hypnosis. I have a passion for financial freedom. And that's the kind of the fusion of those two principles together. So it was kind of a strange journey into it. It was at the age of 35. So a good kind of almost like 12 years after creating my PR agency, I went back to hypnosis. And it came from the Ikigai principle of fulfillment. So I was, quite financially successful, and I was competent in the area, but felt that there was something missing. So I played that game of detective where you figure out, well, what are the things that you're naturally kind of passionate and interested in and learn without an agenda. And it was all kind of hypnosis and psychology, and then literally signed up for a postgraduate qualification in clinical hypnotherapy the very next day, and then started, I think, the next week. And then my background in business and a genuine enthusiasm for it meant that I was getting distinctions in the course, but also was happy to kind of become a practicing hypnotherapist. And a lot of people, unfortunately, that study hypnotherapy don't then actually make that kind of transition to seeing clients. I felt very comfortable doing that because I'd already had a business.
And yeah, that's very true. I think someone told me recently the stats are about 20% of people who actually go through the qualifications and certifications, that they're the people who practice it. 80% either use it for themselves or don't use it at all. And so you then set up an office in central London, did you?
I did. So someone told me a story when I was starting out in the radio industry, and it became a metaphor. It became like a hypnotic suggestion for me. So they told me the story of a young woman who wanted to be a hairdresser in Sydney, and instead of going down all the long kind of course route, she found the most exclusive street in Sydney where all the top salons chose to work for free, just sweeping up hair and that kind of stuff. Someone called in sick one day, they gave her a chair, and then she kind of learned from the very best, built up a reputation, had her own practice in that. And the end of the story was she decided to kind of move away from being a salon because she'd reached the kind of the upper echelons at the same time that other people in her industry were kind of completing a 4-year course, and she'd actually kind of been there and done it. So that, and I was like 21 when I heard that story. So that was kind of planted in my mind. And it's kind of like, well, if I'm going to have a hypnotherapy practice, I need to be on Harley Street. So I kind of, and, people have this perception that you have to kind of own the building or kind of have a long lease. It's like these serviced offices. You can kind of have as much time as you need, but you get the reputation. So having a PR agency and having a location on Harley Street, I was able to kind of position myself as, there is this halo effect that people make assumptions based on things like location and that kind of stuff. So I was able to get quite a good client base. Part of my PR team would reach out to low-level celebrities offering free hypnosis sessions in exchange for feedback and that kind of stuff. So then I'm suddenly, year one of being a hypnotherapist to celebrities. Word gets around. I ended up working with some members of the royal family, not in the UK, it's overseas. But again, when people hear the tagline in my podcast, hypnotherapist to celebrity CEOs and royalty, in their head, I know they're thinking of British royalty. I've never worked with the British royalty, but again, it's a cheeky kind of suggestion that creates, again, this halo effect. And as hypnotherapists, we know the power of prestige. So if you believe that someone is kind of up there, then actually that becomes almost conducive to even more change with the clients that you're working with. So I use every trick in the book to kind of help my clients create change, really.
Absolutely. Well, it is perception. Ultimately the client's mindset is, and so when you started, obviously I can see how the PR background would be hugely beneficial to you, and then having the access to those celebrities. But how did you expand that base beyond that then? And did you meet, I think one of the things we just briefly spoke about beforehand is that hypnotherapy and hypnosis tend to be the last port of call for many people.
Yeah.
Do you find that, and how do you overcome it?
I don't try and overcome it.
Okay.
I remember reading, and I think it was some Milton Erickson transcript, where someone comes into the room and he's tried everything, and Milton encourages him to kind of leave the room, and when his hand's on the handle to leave, where all hope is lost, then he becomes hope, knowing that he's got them at the point of threshold where they're absolutely committed to change. So I just utilize the fact that I'm not at the top of their list to create more leverage in the very change. Some people would like hypnosis to be at the very top. I think it is for people that maybe have known someone, let's say that a previous smoker and they don't smoke anymore, and you've got evidence within your own life that it's effective. Well, you're going to have a different perception than someone, desperate. And desperation can be a good tool for a good hypnotherapist to use that desperation, so long as the client doesn't have, and there is a perception that hypnosis is something that happens to the client rather than with the client. And stage hypnotism, has many very positive things, but one of the things that is disempowering, I think, unless a therapist can kind of steer it in a different direction, is this idea that it happens to them. So I just try and utilize and leverage the fact that they've probably tried lots of other things, and there's gold in whatever they've tried up to that point. So one of the things that I specialized in my early days as a hypnotherapist was weight loss. And I would love asking the question, tell me what you've tried.
Okay.
I've tried everything. I've tried Atkins. I've tried Weight Watchers. I've tried this. I've tried that. Okay, why didn't it work? You're going to hear the limiting belief that is holding them back, why all these strategies didn't work. So the fact that they've done that, their life is my reconnaissance. It makes it super easy then to figure out what's the point of change because they're telling me.
Yeah, that's really, really good. You've been on, say, BBC, and obviously with your PR background, you're able to influence things. But you've been on BBC. I've seen interviews with you over spiders, over gaming, over a few other bits. Has that helped your business, or has that helped get an understanding or an appreciation of hypnotherapy outside of the fear, or you happen to know somebody who, or I've tried everything else and this is my very last port of call?
Yeah. So PR and media coverage, and as someone that's been in PR for over 20 years, I'm in a fairly safe position to be able to say it through experience. It's great for credibility. It's great for thought leadership. It's horrible for generating new clients.
Right. Okay.
People, there's exceptions to it, but people don't see you on TV or hear you on the radio and say, I want to work with that guy. Like there's exceptions, but generally the real value in being featured in the media is that, again, it adds to prestige, it adds to reputation. So I like it when it's on my website and on my social media. And, if I do conferences and that kind of stuff, I can have these little clips of me featured in the media. And again, it adds to the prestige, it adds to the perception, but it does very little in terms of doing that, in terms of generating clients or that kind of stuff. Educationally, it can work, but the average attention span of someone watching kind of the media, it's like it's there and then it's gone.
Yes.
The big opportunity, I think, of being featured in the media is that it then leads to more media opportunities. Because, knowing what I know about the media, your average producer or news editor, they don't like taking risks. So I know that the thought process is, if they're looking for someone that's a phobia expert or an addiction expert, and I've got a few different websites that cover these different things, the algorithm rewards specific things. So quite often I've got loads of media opportunities because I know they've put phobia expert in Google and then I come up, or it's addiction expert for gaming and then I come up. So the algorithm rewards that. Then they go on the website and then they see I've been featured on TV and they're like, okay, he can be trusted to be on our TV show, on our radio show, because we know that he's done this before, because why take a risk? And that can lead to more opportunities. And once you kind of get your foot in the door, it becomes easier and easier to get these kind of things. What I learned, though, is that as good as the media coverage was, my podcast that I created very early on in the pandemic has really been a good source of new clients and elevated perception, because it gives the closest thing that a client can get to either personal experience or word of mouth referrals. And that is that the average hypnotherapist, quite often, if they don't understand marketing and branding, they lack credibility or they lack evidence, social proof. Mm-hmm. Whereas with me, someone could discover me on Spotify. Again, they tend to put keywords in Spotify, weight loss hypnosis, anxiety hypnosis. I've got so many episodes that my bald head pops up and they click it, they listen to me. And it's like, there'll be a few people that hate my style. But, generally the people that like my style, they say, oh, okay, I like your voice. You don't sound like that creepy hypnosis voice. Or they'll say, you really seem to understand it, or I like the creativity, or I like the metaphors, or they experience it and they felt some kind of change in themselves. Well, if they've already experienced that for free, yes, and now they want to make a different change in their life, it's kind of like, well, why take a risk with someone they've got no experience with when they already have some kind of experience with me? And I make it super easy for them to click a link and then kind of book a consultation call. So the podcast has been life-changing for me, but that only came by feeling comfortable in the mainstream media. I
can see that, and you can tell me whether you agree or disagree. But if if people have a fear of hypnosis because largely of what, you're doing something to them, might be the fear as you described it, and then they're listening to what is a session, basically, that fear is then initially just washed aside because they're now familiar. It's easy, it's comfortable, they can see it, and the fear is just gone. So and I've listened to your podcast, and I was telling you about one particular one that I really, really loved when I was listening to it last weekend. The other thing you've actually brought up there, though, in the middle of all that, is therapists and the importance of business. I mean, I mean, a few people will say to you, you may be the most skilled person in the world, but if nobody knows you exist. So what would you say to somebody? Now, you obviously have a business background, you have the PR background, and you have the wealth management background. So, but what would you say to somebody who's starting out and needs to get known?
Yeah, I think therapists are this strange breed of people that, quite often we're subject to the very issues that we're trying to help other people to overcome. I know lots of therapists that have a lack of confidence, and there is this imposter syndrome, and there is this, who am I to, be the one out there? I felt that imposter syndrome when I had and it was interesting because you were talking about kind of Freddie just before we started recording. I remember listening to a Mike Mandel episode where he was interviewing Anthony Jacquin, and one of the takeaways from that interview was Anthony saying, from I think his Reality of Plastic book, he was saying that if you're going to be a hypnotist to your client, you need to be the hypnotist. And I was like, okay, that's a great name. So when I thought of a podcast, it's like, I'd love to take the credit for that. I just borrowed that completely from Anthony and Mike's conversation. But at the point where I'd been doing hypnotherapy, albeit in Harley Street, albeit, with quite a few clients, and launching a podcast called The Hypnotist, of course I had this like amazing imposter syndrome, because it's like, well, who am I to be, the one kind of doing this? But what got me over that was a willingness to kind of take the criticism and take the feedback. And I think a lot of what happens in the world of hypnosis is kind of in the shadows. It's in the therapy room, only between the client and the practitioner. And nobody really knows why there's so many kind of unfounded fears, is because nobody really knows what happens in a hypnosis session. And my early inspirations were the transcripts. So there was the transcripts of the Milton Erickson sessions, but also there's a book called Magic in Action, which is some of Richard Bandler's early interventions as transcripts. And what I found really inspirational and motivational was real therapeutic interactions. For me, that was the thing. So when I created my podcast, it was kind of like, well, I don't want to be doing scripts because there's enough of those kind of weird scripts out there. And I didn't want to compete with Mike Mandel doing another training kind of podcast. It's kind of like, that is an exceptional podcast. So it's kind of like, I wanted to have a podcast where it's real hypnosis with real clients, but still protecting the confidentiality of those clients, hoping that I would then get feedback from hypnotherapists that said, when you did that technique, you did it the wrong way, or, your inductions are too short, or this and that. I was expecting to be attacked from all sides, but I was willing to take that if it made me a better hypnotist, if that makes sense. So the one thing I would say to any kind of hypnotist that is nervous about being in the media or raising their profile or speaking at conferences is embrace the criticism, embrace the feedback, because actually hypnosis is one of those incredibly subjective things. It's a subjective experience to experience, but it's also a subjective thing to do.
Yeah.
So anyone that turns around and says, well, you're doing hypnosis wrong, I'll say, well, what's your criteria? Like on what basis? Like if rapport is there, and if the client is on board with the principles of that, and they go through some kind of change, how can it be wrong? Like it's a very unique, kind of perception. So I think there are natural fears that I encountered myself, but the key thing really is you have to be known for being competent, but it's also helpful to be known to be competent in a niche. Just because so many of what we do now is in the world of digital, you need to make it so that what 2 or 3 words are going to be put into Google and you come up first? If you can't answer that question, you're going to make it really difficult to be found. And going back 20 years in the world of hypnosis, being a hypnotist itself was niche enough. You were the hypnotist for your local town and your local area, which is why back in the day there would be a long list in the Yellow Pages or on the on the early websites of, I can help you with nail biting, blushing, public speaking, fear of flying, and it was a list of like 100 different things, because a hypnotist needed to help everyone in their region with those things. I think because I lived in London, that wasn't an effective strategy. So I chose phobias and weight loss to be my niche. But now we're in a global world where you can work with clients all over the world. So your niche could be ultra specific. It could be, a phobia of a specific type of, thing that's so rare, mysophobia, which is a fear of germs. There is enough people in the world that have this, that one therapist could just focus in that and nothing else, and they would be the foremost authority on that. So my advice to therapists from a business perspective is, don't be afraid to kind of get yourself out there, and don't be afraid to specialize, because the more you specialize, the more competent you're going to become by understanding the distinctions in that specific problem.
And obviously, the more of a reputation you'll get, which will then just feed your business going forward. And I mean, that totally. Your podcast, I think I saw recently 6 million downloads. Is that correct?
Yeah, 6.1 now. 6.1. It kind of goes
up.
That's
a testament. That is just a testament to how good the podcast is. So, and it's not your only one either. You have another one as well, do you?
Yeah, so the Hypnotist Podcast is, as I said before, real hypnosis with real clients, but protecting the confidentiality of those clients. So it's real hypnosis sessions, but it's really only me talking. Whereas I have another podcast called Modern Mindset, where I interview people. So kind of like this interaction, I'll have people, and it's not just people from the world of kind of hypnosis or psychology or personal development. It's people in finance and people in, health and all different kind of stuff. So what I find useful about having a podcast is that it's a legitimate reason to have a conversation with anyone.
Yes.
So if you were to reach out to someone that you find really interesting, maybe they've written a book or something, and you say, can I talk to you for half an hour? You come across like a weirdo. If, however, you say, I have a podcast called Modern Mindset, I'd love to have you on my show. You get to have a conversation with really interesting people. And now you're not a weirdo, you're a podcast host. Even if you're still weird, it's it's that it legitimizes things. And I think if it's interesting for me, it's probably going to be interesting for my audience as well.
And obviously that, I mean, part of what hypnosis will do, because even just talking to Freddie during the week and his definition or his limitlessness, I think is the word I'm going to describe, of hypnosis. And we were talking about mindset, and he uses the term create the life you want by helping others create their life. I mean, that mindset podcast would be huge in terms of that, because it's inspiration, it's ideas, it's they can do it, I can do it kind of stuff. But you just actually reminded me of something. Mike Mandel, when they did all the trainings in Toronto, would say, we wanted to learn from the best trainers in the world. So rather than go to see them, we said we'd bring them to Toronto and we get trained for free. So I'm a bit like that with this podcast and this conference. So I know what you're doing.
Yeah, and why not?
It makes perfect sense.
Why not? I also think for hypnotherapists, the use of metaphor is such a powerful tool in the toolkit of a good hypnotherapist. But in order to have intuitive metaphors, you have to have quite a big, broad frame of reference of reality. So I mentioned that kind of praying mantis kind of metaphor that I use for a client that's going through a divorce. And it's kind of like, you can't script that. You have to have the knowledge of a praying mantis, the fact that some of them have parasites. How do they survive from a parasite? And then how do you map that across from the reality of a broken man going through a divorce? Like, that sounds complex, but the human mind can do that. It's kind of
absolutely. And as you were talking about it, and I think we did that before we press record, as you were talking about it, I could, as soon as you went, oh well, they've nearly got to die and get into the water for the stuff to come out. You know, it's immediate. Then you can actually see it very clearly. But in hypnosis, obviously, a lot of that it's unconscious. It's not conscious.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. So, and you're going to be speaking on metaphors in the conference.
More embedded commands and nested loops. So although I love talking about metaphors, I love disassociation. You know, I think the episode you heard of my podcast involved like a parallel universe and that kind of stuff. Well, that's clearly is a metaphor, but it's also a extreme level of disassociation.
Absolutely.
So the reason why I think hypnotherapists don't use nested loops is because they are intimidated by the idea of getting lost in their own language. So for anyone listening that isn't familiar with nested loops, it's the idea of a story within a story within a story. Each story is the idea of one extra level of disassociation. So I call it at some level the Inception induction. So if you've seen the movie Inception, there's this concept of you can have a dream within a dream within a dream within a dream, and there's levels of disassociation. So nested loops are like that. And you know, Bandler, I think, is an excellent example where he would start telling a story, and then within that story, he goes off on a tangent, and within that story, he goes off on a tangent. From an auditory level, I think he was a genius at kind of nested loops. Obviously, Milton Erickson and loads of, you know, brilliant hypnotherapists, you know, great with nested loops. But what puts most people off, I use the metaphor of Hansel and Gretel, is that they use breadcrumbs to kind of find their way back, you know, from the woods. But of course, the animals ate the breadcrumbs and they got lost in the woods and led to their demise in the witch's gingerbread house. But that's the fear that people have with using nested loops, is they have to remember where they are to get back. So I use a visual equivalent of nested loops. So what you heard in that podcast episode is, well, you're in your current location, breathe in, associate, you know, activate that mindfulness. And then sometimes I'll use tools like the one I published yesterday. It said, you know, imagine a time when you were a child listening to a bedtime story. Okay. And then imagine hearing that bedtime story. And then imagine that you're going into the book and then you are now a character in the bedtime story. And then walk from there to somewhere else. Very quickly, you're like 4 or 5 levels deep. But it's easy to find your way back because you've now got the mnemonic of the chronology of the story to know where you are. So that's what I'll be talking about at the conference, is the how to make nested loops easy, and this idea of an inception induction. I don't like long progressive relaxation as an induction. The average length of my hypnosis sessions is about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So if I do a 10-minute progressive relaxation, I don't have any time to do that. So using levels of disassociation for me is a rapid way to induce confusion states, disassociation states. Each level for me has the premise of a deeper level of disassociation. Sometimes I'll fuse a bit of progressive relaxation in there. So essentially what people can expect in the conference is a way to provide an alternative to either rapid inductions or progressive relaxation inductions that use levels of disassociation, but it's a very, very simple way to make nested loops easy.
They're a wonderful tool. I am familiar with them. I think I've first came across them through Mike Mandel, and I do use them as well. They're, you know, even when someone's consciously aware, they'd miss that little punchline in the middle because they get lost in the story. And it really is a wonderful tool. And there's so many wonderful tools in hypnosis. I'm really looking forward to that. Just given both your PR, your podcasts, everything else, what would you say the profession should do to kind of expand? Is it word of mouth? Is it what would it be?
Yeah, for me, it's accessibility. So that was my goal of making the podcast, is that people can imagine being in the room of a real hypnosis session, observing actually kind of what happened.
Fear is taken away then, basically.
Yeah, that's it. So for me, it's accessibility, and it's also credibility.
Wow.
So I think conferences like yours, conferences like Hypnothoughts and the UK Hypnosis Conference, you've got people that dedicate their lives to getting very, very competent in a certain thing. That's good for the industry, because I think the stuffy mainstream field of psychology kind of looks, even though there are countless journal articles, you've got serious academics like Kirsch and Irving, like in that area. Generally, it's seen as a pseudoscience. Generally, it's seen as kind of less than CBT. So I think the two key things that can really happen, I think, to kind of make hypnotherapy more mainstream is accessibility, because that's going to eliminate the fears, and credibility. There are good quality trainers like Mike Mandel and the Jacquins. Unfortunately, there's lots of ropey, kind of training out there, and sometimes there is over promising, I think. So, people can come out of a 5-day bit of training and think, right, I'm equipped now to start working with PTSD clients. I'm going to cure them in a single session. It's kind of like, that's reckless, and that does no good for our industry whatsoever. So I think credibility and accessibility would go a long way to making it more.
I think for me it's a case of evidence and a groundswell coming up. So like that the public are actually seeing the benefit, and it's those stories that go from one to one. But then the evidence that exists, because there is all kinds of evidence out there, and there's research on that evidence too. And it may just be a matter of sitting down and pulling it all together someday. Adam, thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to your conversation in Dublin.
Me too. Yeah, I'm excited to be there. And to anyone listening that's going to be in Dublin, Irish Hypnotherapy Conference, I'm excited to see you, and hopefully you learn something from my talk.
Absolutely. I guarantee you will, because Adam's podcast is amazing. And if you haven't taken time to listen to it, then please do. It's called The Hypnotist. And in that is a lot of metaphor and nested loops and all kinds of stuff. So, and then he'll show you how he constructs them. So,
thank you, John.
Thank you very much. And wherever you are and whatever time you're watching this, have a wonderful day.